Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for spending your Friday night with us. My name is Tora, and I'll be one of the hosts of tonight's seminar, and the other one is Chansey, and he's there as well. And we will get started without further ado. Okay, hold on one second. Sorry, there we go. Okay, I'm still up. I'm pretty sure I'm still up. So what we're going to be talking about today, and it's really important that you remember this, is that we have a lot of information in these slides, and you'll want these slides at some point in your MCAT career. Okay, so these slides are all available on Facebook, and just go to Prep 101 MCAT on Facebook, and you just like the page, and then we'll send you or you can access on the left hand side. You can see Getting into Medical School seminars, which I might point out we will be offering soon. I haven't gotten the dates confirmed yet, but if you haven't been to a Getting into Medical School seminar, that's where we'll talk a lot about all the other things that go into getting into med, not just the MCAT. And so stay tuned for those kinds of seminars. But tonight we have lots of information on these slides. You're not going to be able to sort of remember all of it, and a lot of it depending on where you guys are coming from tonight, what stage you're at in your pre-med career and your undergrad and getting into med and all those kinds of things. You'll take different things from this seminar right now than you might a week before you're to write the MCAT. These slides apply to every phase of right up until you get your scores, and even after, and what to do now depending on what your scores are. So just an introduction of who is here with you this evening. This is me. I have a PhD in molecular genetics. My expertise is worm gonads. It's pretty awesome. And I'm a prof. So I teach at the University of Alberta. And this is my side gig, I guess, my side hustle. And so I've been doing it for 13 years, I think. 14 maybe, a really long time, and been teaching the MCAT as well. One of the other things that we do with Prep 101 is do undergraduate sessions. And so I teach undergrad at Queen's, for instance. Anyone coming to us from Queen's tonight? I'm doing Bio 103 coming up. So I teach. That's what I do. I teach and I talk about science, and it's really, really fun. Chansey, on the other hand, is a doctor, and he also gets to talk and teach about science.
Definitely. Hey, everyone. So I'm currently a resident physician in Ottawa, Ontario. I work at CHIO, which is the children's hospital right in the city there. I graduated in 2020, sort of as COVID was ramping up. I was getting out of med school. I completed both med school and a master's at Dalhousie University. At the same time, similar to Tora, been with Prep 101 now for a little over 10 years, teaching mostly MCAT courses, prep and bio, a little bit of chem. Maritimes is sort of home base for me, but I'm in central Canada now, and I've been out to the West Coast too. I've been in your shoes. I've been the one who's contemplated whether or not medicine was the journey I wanted to pursue, so I can relate and hopefully offer antidotes as the evening goes forth. Specifically, I've been on the admissions teams at different schools. I've also been involved as an MMI interviewer. So whether it be tonight or on our next seminar, I'm happy to share any insider experiences, tips and tricks as they come up. So pleasure to be here. First things first, as alluded to earlier, the path of medicine has many different tethers. We're focusing primarily on the MCAT tonight, but just keep in mind that having an application to medical school really relies on a number of pieces. Your GPA from your undergraduate degree, extracurricular activities, reference letters, autobiography, sketches to compile the application. And ultimately, it all is submitted to the schools of your choosing. Schools determine who gets an interview, who doesn't. And then from there, you hope to show your best to face in person and ultimately obtain one of the seats at the school of your choice and gain that acceptance letters.
And Chansey, I might point out that all the other bubbles in this slide, except for the orange one, except for the MCAT, we'll discuss at our Getting into Medical School seminar. So keep a lookout for that. So tonight we're going to be going through lots of information. Some of it might be new to you. Some of it might be old news, depending on where you are at. And some of you might have written the MCAT already and gone, oh God, I need help, which happens to many. So so we'll kind of just start with the very, very, very beginning. And some people will be totally new to this whole concept of getting into medical school. There will be lots of questions, and the more questions you have, the better, because it'll keep Mike busy. So Mike is also behind the scenes. He's a superstar chem instructor. He's definitely the best. And he is working behind the scenes. So if you have any questions as we go through tonight, there's the Q&A. And between Chansey, myself, and Mike, we'll be responding as much as we can. So if you have questions, this is for you guys, right? Make sure that you know what's ahead of you. And so let's get through the basics. Number one, the MCAT stands for the Medical College Admissions Test. Okay, so it's a standardized test that schools use as an indicator of your proficiency, of your ability to get into medical school. And it's 6.25 hours. That's of writing time. Like that's actually sitting in front of the computer and actually doing the exam. Okay, and there's all the rigmarole. Your day is about 7.5, 8 hours long by the time you're actually walking in and walking out. So it's a big, 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 big day. Not to mention it's the hardest exam you'll have written for sure. And now this is an important acronym to remember, the AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges. This is the place where you go to get official materials. This is where you go to register for the actual test date. Okay, these are the American Association of Medical Colleges is the brains behind the MCAT. Okay, and I have to say, huge respect for the AAMC. What they've done with the MCAT, especially since 2015, and I've been around before that, is to create a really good measure of how proficient you are and how good a doctor you're going to be. This is a standardized test, but it's not your typical standardized test of did you just know the material. This is totally different. It's a thinking test. And that's one of the most important messages of tonight. It's a thinking test where you have to prep very, very differently for it, study differently than you do for a typical undergraduate course. And it's more than just practice, and it's more than just knowing the material. It's guided practice, it's discipline, it's having all kinds of different tools at your disposal. So I actually love the MCAT. I think it's a fascinating exam. I know no one likes the MCAT that doesn't teach it, but I just have a huge respect for it. Um and and I think that makes it better from, because I've been around just doing this so long. I keep talking about how old I am, but the reality is that this test is really a thinking test. Is that knowing a lot of stuff, is memorizing all of the enzyme names and glycolysis? That's not going to get you very far on the MCAT. It's, can you think? Can you problem solve? Can you work through and incorporate new information into a problem that's in front of you? And so it's fascinating. And most importantly, it's a very different type of test than, as far as I can tell, and having taught undergraduate courses with Prep 101 across the country, as far as I can tell, nobody across the country tests like this. But it matters. And it matters at every phase of your application, from the very beginning, whether a school is even going to open your application. Even if they click, yeah, I want to look at this person. If you don't meet the minimum MCAT criteria, they don't look at your application. They will take your money, but they're not going to look at your application. Okay. Then there's the pre-interview, deciding who gets an interview and who doesn't. Your MCAT factors in. It's not the only thing, but it's an extremely important part of your application package. It's an extremely important part of your portfolio. And then after the interview, most schools take your MCAT again as an indicator of how proficient and how good a doctor you will be. Okay. Now, different schools do have different strategies about how much they incorporate the MCAT into their admission criteria. That's the Getting into Medical School seminar. Okay. That's where we'll talk and flush out what each school is looking for. So the exam is entirely computerized, and it's passage based. And bear with me for 1 second. I'll talk what passages are, unless you've done an exam, then you know exactly what they are and why they're so hard. It's all multiple choice, and it's computerized. And, one of the things that we talk about in the course, as well as we guide you through it and sometimes physically even hold your hand through it, is that, we think about that we stare at screens all day. Yeah, totally. All bloody day. And yet, are you actually thinking while scrolling TikTok and staring at a screen? Oh God. Or if you are, just let me know what TikToks you follow, and then I can actually think while I do it. Um, so we stare at a screen, but we're not actively thinking. So when you do both at the same time, it's exhausting. And so that's one of the things that we encourage as I go through this 10 weeks of a course. It's like talking about how to build your endurance from all the little things that are going to make your test day that much better. So almost all the exam is passage based. And this is what a passage looks like. It can be an excerpt from usually scientific journals. It's just sort of like a 400-ish word um, paragraph or two talking about a new concept in science that you likely don't know anything about. Okay. And then you get asked 4 to 6 questions on that. This is the format. This is what the MCAT looks like. Everything that we do as part of our practice with you guys, in terms of throughout the whole course, looks exactly the same format as what you're going to see on the actual test day. So when you sit down to the test day, you're going to know exactly what to expect. So this is this computer interface that they have. And the passages are interesting. I'll give you a little story. So I've written a lot of practice MCATs, of course, and my PhD, I did 6 years studying the role of UNC45 in the worm gonad. It was fascinating, not gonna lie, it was amazing. Um, and I am one of the very few experts in this gene called UNC45. Lo and behold, in one of the practice tests, there's an excerpt from a paper of some of my collaborators, and it's all about the gene that I am one of the few world leading experts in is UNC45. That's not a claim to fame. It's UNC45 in the worm gonads. There's one of us who study it. Um, and here I am, like reading this passage, and I'm like, oh, this is like, oh my, right? And yet I still had to read the passage. Like I still had to concentrate on what they were saying because I don't remember which antibody they used. I just know their findings. I know the big picture. And now I have to read for their data and analyze their data in a fresh way. So even if you're an expert in this material, the passage is going to throw something new at you. And that's sort of frustrating, kind of cool because you get to learn lots as you go through the course. The MCAT is divided into 4 sections. This is also the order that you write them in, and we'll talk about that. So there's Chem and Phys, also called Chemical and Physical Foundations of Biological Systems, just called Chem and Phys. Then you go from Chem and Phys or the physical sciences to CARS. This is the critical analysis and reasoning skills. And then you have another set of passages for bio and biochem or biological and biochemical foundations of living systems, and then psych and soc. Okay. And the way that the test is structured is that you have okay, here's the deal. There's going to be 3 sciences: physical sciences, biological sciences, psych and soc. Those 3 units I'm going to treat as the sciences, and then we have CARS. And CARS, the critical analysis and reasoning skills section, is very different, and takes a totally new brain that you have to kind of like lobotomize yourself through the sciences and put in a CARS brain. It's a very, very different style of test. So I'll treat those separately. In the sciences, physical sciences, bio, psych, and soc, you have 59 questions. Okay, so 59 questions, and you read 10 passages. So 10 brand new concepts that are new to you. They build upon the knowledge that you arrive at the MCAT with, right? And your job is to integrate that new information in with your existing foundation information and answer questions based on that. And you have 95 minutes for all the sciences. The CARS section is slightly different. You have fewer passages because they're longer. There's 9 passages, and you have 90 minutes to do it, and you have fewer questions as well, which means each question counts that little bit more towards your final grade. And so the general topics are exactly as you would expect in chem and physics. There's chem and physics, right? But there's also some organic chemistry. There's the organic chemistry that tends to be there on the MCAT is on the harder side, I guess. So we spend a lot of time in our course doing organic chemistry just because it is a subject that students struggle with quite significantly. And there's also, in the chem and phys section, there might be some biology, but it's really interdisciplinary. So what that means is that in chem and phys, you might have a passage about electromagnetic spectrum. Okay. And that's all physics stuff and waves and whatever physics does. And then you're talking about how the eye captures that visible wavelength of light and converts it into some neural signal. So you see, like there's often some overlap. The sciences, the hard sciences like chem and physics, often have some medical role or some physiological connection. For the critical analysis and reasoning skills, CARS, again, let's put that aside. I'll talk about it. I will wax poetic about it because it's amazing. And then we get to bio and biochem. There is more biochem than people often underestimate how much biochemistry is on the MCAT. So it's really just kind of first year biochem or your first course in biochem in terms of undergrad, but they just test it a lot and it tends to be on the hard side as well. And then some biology, of course, leaning more towards physiology. Some OChem, those kinds of things get swept up into the biological sciences section. And then psych and soc is psych and soc and biology, like the areas of the brain. So it's all interdisciplinary that way. Now, if you look at it and you say, let's break it down, how many questions on biology are there? And about 20% of the exam is bio, which makes sense. If you want to be a doctor, you should have a pretty good handle on biological concepts. So 20% is heavy in biology, and then we slowly go down from there. But interestingly, cars, because it's a dedicated section, it's worth 25% of your grade. And we'll talk about scoring, okay? But each section is weighted equally. And so cars is worth a really big chunk of your overall score. And Chancey will talk about what scores mean. And so cars is something that is very intimidating and yet something to focus on. And so the MCAT tests obviously reasoning skills, scientific knowledge, and critical thinking, like process of elimination. Can you typical questions are like, which of the following would make the best control for this experiment that they've shown? And it's like, oh, you're asking about something that they didn't show, but you're asking to have to think about what would fit in terms of what control should they have done, whether they showed it or not. And it's very interdisciplinary, as I've mentioned. And the MCAT, it's such a tough day. 6.25 hours of thinking. That mental stamina is something that can be built up, and we sort of plan that and program that in our course. The first week you're not doing 6 full-length exams of 7-hour days. That's not, there's no point in that. You're exhausted. You can build up your endurance and your test taking endurance and your confidence and your stamina. And so we build all those things. All of this list is our job to train you to get better on. And your composure, your confidence, like, can you do this? And I'm here to tell you that you can, because I can. And well, Chancey is in fact a doctor, so he can tell you how the MCAT is actually relevant to the practice of medicine.
Certainly. And hopefully at this point in time, we still have good numbers. No one's dropped out of intimidation, which is good. The MCAT can be scary, but you need to find this enthusiasm for the MCAT, because ultimately it's what happens after the MCAT, which is fueling you through this hardship, the time spent studying. The MCAT's relevant in a number of ways, not only to standardize how we evaluate academic performance of individuals that come from a wide variety of majors, but ultimately it's developed to simulate some of the situations you'll be put forth, some of the actions you'll be thrown into when you're actually practicing, if not in medical school as a clerkship, definitely by the time you're a resident and ultimately a licensed physician. So think about problem solving. There's obvious problem solving on the test. It would be very similar to patient management. If I get a call, a stat call to a room that a patient is suffering from severe bradycardia, when I'm thinking of that patient, I'm ultimately trying in my head as I'm going up the stairs, running, or going up the elevator to the room, what's going on here? What do I need to be prepared for? What's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? And how am I going to get myself through it? Number 2 and 3, critical thinking and scientific knowledge. The scientific knowledge piece is a given. You don't become a doctor in a week. You've got to go to med school. You've got to put the time into studying. And the same thing's true for the MCAT. Can you actually be regimented enough to know a vast set of material that you can apply in different situations, ultimately being the critical thinking step? I'm going up the stairs. This child's got bradycardia. I'm thinking, what's causing this bradycardia? What do I know about the child? What questions do I need to ask when I get in the room? What is their overall health background? Like, what's contributing to this clinical picture? When I get to the room, or if I'm still going up the stairs, if it is taking me more than a minute, I'm thinking about what's probably not happening here based on what I have so far. And then once I get to the bedside and I've gained additional information, I know this child is very swollen, very edematous. They've got a heart condition. They're known to do this from time to time. Is there a history of this? With that said, I can start ruling out some things. I could say, okay, is this or isn't this heart failure? Should I be getting a cart, a code cart, because I think this person's going to crash or not? Time constraints. Sometimes you have to make decisions very quickly. And there might not always be one choice, the right choice. There might be 3 or 4 options. And that's really the way the MCAT works. Sometimes you'll be dissatisfied because you'll be choosing between sort of the best of the worst answers in a lot of times. And then finally, passages. So the MCAT is really geared towards giving you a large body of information that you need to sift through and pick out what you need and ultimately apply it for the question stems that are coming up. The same thing is true of, say, a patient's chart or maybe a nursing report I'm getting when I rush to the room of the potentially coding kid or the child that has very severe bradycardia. There's lots of information that I'm going to get that I don't necessarily need to address my main question of, is this child sick, not sick? What do I need to do to help them clinically right now? And what can I put to the side and review later? Or do I not need it all to manage this child in this setting? So there's a little clinical glimpse as to what the MCAT's trying to pull out of you. Additional details, getting back to more logistics, time-wise, the test is offered on 30 different days throughout a calendar year, so 30 targeted for 2021. It happens in hundreds of computer labs across the country. The cost, it ranges between $315 and $370 US, and that really depends on how early you sign up versus if you're signing up a few weeks before a test date. Registration, we come back to our very first slide of this presentation. You need to go to the AAMC, you log in, you make an account, then ultimately you can sign up for a test date. After you've written the MCAT, once you've gotten over that hurdle, you're going to be doing the waiting game, twiddling your thumbs, sweating profusely, checking that email, waiting for a notification that your scores are in. And you'll be waiting approximately 1 month, give or take a few days on either end. In terms of the number of times you can write the MCAT, in a year, 3 times is the maximum. And I said this before, and I'll say it again, I would be ultimately impressed if you were able to write the MCAT 3 times in a calendar year, mainly because you can only hold one MCAT time slot at a given time. 2-year period, you can write the MCAT 4 times, and then in your lifetime. So when you've started this journey to when it has to end from a testing perspective, 7 times in a lifetime. The scores are valid for 5 years. So if you choose to write this summer, you know that you're good right up until the 2025 to 2026 application cycle, because you've got 5 years to actually implement or utilize those scores for an application. And finally, a lot of people are writing this exam, a lot of candidates, 70,000 on average.
And I might point out, Chansey, the on the AAMC website, it says that your score validity is in general 3 years. Most US medical schools have a 3-year validity cycle. Most Canadians are 5. But again, the Getting into Medical School seminar will help sort of suss out which school is what, whatever. But so it's generally for Canada. I know if you go to the AAMC website, there's this 3-year mention. That's mostly for
Yeah.
American schools. So something to keep in mind. Okay, well, Chancey, I want to hear about your test days, because you wrote it a couple of times. What were they like?
I have the personal short story, the Spark Notes. If I'm not dating myself by saying Spark Notes, it's been 3 real deal MCATs and probably 50 or 60 practice tests as part of my role as teaching this course. But the 3 real deals, I mean, the first one started with, maybe underestimating the MCAT and going forth not as prepared, where the latter 2, I was really focused, got the scores I wanted, and just kind of built them up over time. What didn't change was the day. It's a long day from getting up in the morning, 6 or 7 o'clock to shower, get yourself ready for this marathon of a test. You show up at the testing center and you can see here in the far left column, typically what the flow of the day looks like. You show up at the facility, and before you even get to the computer, there's a few steps you need to go through. You need to get checked in, confirm your identity, leave everything that's not essential to the test sort of in a room just outside the examination center. So book bags, jackets, things like that. You really just walk forward with your lunch to a break room, and then you're ultimately ready to get shepherded into to the examination room itself. Before even getting there, keep in mind, this is a weird experience. It's like the ultimate passage through airport security. You're being wanded, you're giving fingerprints, you're signing your name, you're copying your signature 2 or 3 times. And then when you really feel uncomfortable because you've exposed your pockets underneath your legs, taken off your socks, maybe not the sock piece, but everything else up to that, you ultimately are nervous and you're brought to your chair where you'll be sat in front of a computer. You'll have your essentials to your side, scrap paper, pencil, which we'll mention a little later. And if you're lucky enough, you might even have a camera right in your face just to record how you perform throughout the day. You're at the computer turns on, you'll be taken through a variety of screens to walk you through sort of what the day is going to look like. So we have an examinee's agreement, a tutorial, and then the test. So the same four sections that Tora mentioned earlier in that exact order will appear for you. You'll have chem and physics first with an optional break between chem and then getting to the cars section. I have to put the plug in now that often candidates see these breaks, they think, oh, 10 minutes, I'll just throw those 10 minutes away and I'll just go on to the next section. It is so vital and so important that you take your breaks when you're writing this exam. If anything, for the mental recalibration, the clarity, the change of scenery, get away from the computer, go outside, use the washroom, and then come back. Once you finish the first half of your day, cars is done. You get a mid-exam break. It's a little longer. It's intended to be a lunch, and use it as such. You will have snacks. You'll need the fuel. You may even need an Advil midway if you're anyone like me who does not like being in front of a computer for too long. And of course, a washroom break. Then you come back for the last two sections, the bio, the psych, the soc. And at the end of the exam content, you're going to have a screen that says, would you like to void or score your exam? And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later on to how to approach that question. The last step of the day, you're close to 7 hours in at this point in time, 7.5 if you've taken your breaks. You're given the thing that everybody wants to see at the end of the test, which is a satisfaction survey. So Chancey, how was your testing day? How was the temperature of the room? How was the lighting of the room? Was the camera just a little too close to your eye? How are the proctors? How are the lunch facilities? And I've got all the mental capacity to be very critical and do the survey and not be annoyed. But it's important. The information is essential for improving the testing days of the future candidates. When the satisfaction survey is done, you're grabbing your coat, your lunch, you're walking out of the facility wondering, what have I just done? Do I really want to do this? You're schwitzing, you're sweating. You ultimately call your mom crying. You rush home to collapse and fall asleep, or you vomit in the nearest trash can. It's probably a wide diversity of all these feelings, but ultimately you did it. It's a long day. It was a long day for me each of the 3 times, but ultimately they run the days well. The proctors are great.
And Chancey, I want to ask you, do you know anybody who left the exam feeling good? I've never met anybody. Have
No,
you?
I think if you leave the exam feeling good, that might be more of a problem than when you leave the exam feeling bad, because you're mentally exhausted and you have lots of self-doubt. And you don't remember the 90% of questions that you probably did okay on. You remember the 10% that you struggled with, that you got yourself down on, and ultimately everyone leaves feeling down.
All right, so let's rip through a couple of these slides. Again, they're largely for reference as well, because really when you get these slides, these and as well as the Getting into Medical School seminar and All About Med School, the 3 seminars that we run, this is really the only place you're going to get all this information. Okay, so that's why the slides are valuable. But some of them are, pretty straightforward, like what's tested in chemistry and physical foundations of living systems. Well, it's chem and physics. Again, weighting towards biochem. There's lots of that. There's a little bit of organic chem, but again, that tends to be on the difficult side. So we, as a course, have decided to focus a lot on that, so you can really, really feel confident in the organic chemistry. And as I mentioned before, there's 59 multiple choice questions. There are 10 passages, and there's 44 questions associated with those passages. So roughly 4 to 6 questions per passage. There are also a set of 15 what we call standalones or independent questions. And those 15 questions for all the sciences, again, this formula stays the same, 59 questions, 44 passage-based, 15 standalones. Those standalones are like an undergraduate multiple choice exam. Okay. And they're about that level of difficulty as well. So they're the ones that you should be knocking out of the park if you have done the work. And that's what we are training you guys to do. And then we'll train you to do well in the passage-based ones, of course. So similarly, again, we'll leave cars till the end. The biochem section is mostly biology, and I would say that weights a lot more heavily on physiology. If I was to separate the 65% in bio, I would say, Chancey, I don't know, what do you think? 70% is physiology and 30% is like molecular, cellular kind of rule, somewhere
No
in there.
doubt. No
Yeah.
doubt.
And so there's, roughly physiology. That's first year, whatever, first available course in physiology that you would take. Physiology 210 at U of A, probably a Bio 103 even at Queen's. Your respective institutions have some kind of physiology course. And then some organic chemistry rears its ugly head. Then we get to psych and soc. Again, one of the things that you keep hearing from me is like first year level, first year couple of sections of psych. Usually most institutions have 2 intro psych courses, and SOS 101. That's what psych and SOS is testing. Again, you see that there's 59 multiple choice questions associated, 44 of those associated with passages, and 15 of those as your standalones, as your theory, as your straightforward, typical multiple choice questions. And so those and all the sciences have 10 passages per section. So the science passages are information. So information is like, reads like a textbook. And actually the AMC just writes them. They just write a textbook chapter and then they get you to read it. And it might be discussing the function of T cells. And then you learn about T cells, you might know a little bit, but then they build on it and then you answer questions based on that. So it's more just like, can you integrate new knowledge into your understanding? I would say that the left-hand side of this slide is the most common. So the other is these experimental or research studies where you're given new data. You're given information from literally from a first author paper. Okay. So from a scientific publication, and it has all of the grammar mistakes and science terrible, like English writing ability, and all of the things that we hate about reading scientific papers. You have to do that for a really long time on the MCAT, and they'll give you real data and then ask to interpret it. Can you take in this new information, analyze it, critically analyze it? What's a good control? Why did they use that technique? Why didn't they use this one? What would it be another? What would be the next logical experiment in the trajectory of this research? So those are the kinds of things that are you a good scientist? And then there's problem solving, which I think probably Lance Mike can probably back me up on this more in the chem world, where you're trying to, if you presented with a problem that doesn't have a straight up answer. And persuasive lands more in the psych and soc, where you get a type of passage that is like trying to convince you that their theory is a good one. Don't see it too much in my world in the sciences, in biological sciences. So in the science section, what you're testing is scientific reasoning, right? Can you critically assess data? Your scientific knowledge, of course, that's only 35% on average. Walking in with great grades and a good GPA doesn't guarantee that you're going to do well in the MCAT, because most university courses don't really ask you to think too much. My Bio 201 students are rolling over right now and rolling their eyes because they're like, you do this to us. That's probably one of the only courses I've seen, because I'm trying to like get you to be more critical thinkers. But and then there's reasoning within the text and beyond the text. What's the next logical experiment? That's beyond the text. Within the text is, why did they do it that way? And that's within the text. So the sciences are, again, I want to sort of emphasize, yes, of course, you have to come in with knowledge. Our course focuses on lectures. Yes, we have about half the time we dedicate to teaching you the material. But the other half, and the outweighted half, is teaching you how to problem solve, how to think differently about the scientific material in ways that can be taught. It can absolutely be taught, and it can absolutely be practiced. And then we get to cars. I always love this slide. It's like, woo woo, like no prior knowledge required. Let's just write it right now, because I don't have to know anything going in. Can't I just do well in cars? Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
That definitely wasn't me the first time.
Yeah, you hated cars, hey?
Yeah,
Have
I've
you
given
learned to
lots
love
of
it though?
practice. I don't know if I learned to love it, but I learned how to tackle it.
I've learned to love it. I've learned to love it. The first cars passage I wrote, I don't know where I was in my career, like first year grad or something. And someone was writing the MCAT. I think that's got to be about when it was. A friend was writing the MCAT and they were like, "Do you try this?" I'm like, "Okay, how hard can it be? It's like reading comprehension, isn't it?" And I was like, "What? This is ridiculous." And then I have become one with cars. I love it. It's 9 passages. So fewer passages, but more words. They're about 600 word long essays. And again, the same average of 4 to 6 questions per passage, 53 questions. So the fact that cars is weighted the same means every question in cars makes up a larger portion of your overall MCAT score. And cars is, you just, like excited. Love it. I'll make you love it. I will force you to love it. Um, it's it's about the subjects that they can draw from, everything from philosophy to to pop culture, like anything. I mean, I've read passages about um, art history and the critique of the New York Opera House. And I've read passages about whether women should be in combat roles in the military. Like, it's so random. And that's one of the, I think this what's students find frustrating, is that you sit up to the cars and you have no idea what to expect. You could be reading a passage about different basket weaving techniques, and you could be, then the next passage is some legal conversation about, I don't know, about border management in the EU. Like, you're like, what? None of it you'll be an expert at. None of it you're expected to be an expert at. But the thing is that what it tests is, can you think? And that's what I love about it. Cars is, it always feels, I think, almost universally, students when they approach cars feel like it's just some torture test. They're just doing this to be mean. But cars is an extremely important section for the MCAT. It really does test the fundamental things that the MCAT's trying to get at. Do you understand what's happening? And sometimes you don't in a passage, but you can get through it. Can you problem solve? Can you come up with tactics and strategies that are going to help you get to the right answer? So can you read within the text or beyond the text? I've never found those headings that particularly helpful. But it tests not like reading comprehension. You're not reading like Dick and Jane went up the hill to get the pail of water. Where did Dick and Jane go? Oh, up the hill, because I just read that. That's not the kind of comprehension that we're talking about. One of the things that I like to stress when we're teaching how to do well in cars is that the answer isn't in the passage. The answer is about the passage. It's about the story. But you're not going to go, finger peck and just go through and find the answer that you're looking for. So it's a very, very challenging section, undoubtedly, especially for science students. Like, I know this too, that I'm used to getting the right answer, and there's a right answer. And then I get it and it shows up on my calculator and I'm like, yeah, it's D. With cars, you never feel that way, ever, ever. I've been doing this forever. And I like, every time I set up to a cars, I'm like, I think it's C. And then I keep going and it is, but I never feel that good about it, even to this day. So don't expect to either. It's very dissatisfying. It's very frustrating. And yet you can do really well on it without ever feeling good about how well you did. And I might point out, the poor CARS score is by far the most common reason why students have to retake the exam. So there's so much advice out there that's horrible, like really, really horrible. So stay off those forums and don't listen to that cousin of a friend who just like wrote the MCAT without studying. Person doesn't exist. But like some people recommend just skip a passage entirely and just focus on the other 8. What? You're already cutting your score down by a ninth, whatever that is, 11%, automatically. Or you click through and you find a passage that you like. You know what? You got to answer them all. Just answer them in order. We teach a very processive, formulaic, kind of pedestrian approach. It's just do them in order, one at a time, take a break, start again. And it's just a formula that works. So all these speed reading and yeah. We're going to basically give the answers away tonight, like our strategy and our tactics that we employ in the course. It takes a long time to mature those and really learn to be masters at using all these tools. But still, again, this is why all of these slides are available, because if you choose not to take a Prep 101 course, then you have all of this available to you. You just don't have the guides, the people like Chancey and me guiding you through it. So what is CARS about? Cars is all about the author. Okay, it's all about what the main idea is and who wrote these words. Because someone sat down with a lot of intention to write certainly a much longer a manuscript of some kind, where we're only reading 600 words of those. And you have to figure out who this person is. And usually in the first day of cars, we'll read a passage and I'll ask you, like, what color socks is the author wearing? And there's a whole bunch of students who just look at me like, I am paying for what? Like, is she for real? And I'm like, no, seriously, seriously, think about it. If you've got, if you've just read 600 words, few paragraphs, 5 or 6 paragraphs about different basket weaving techniques, in comparison between Ethiopia and Vietnam and Peru. And it's like this ethnographic study. Who wrote it? Stereotype the crap out of the author, and you have come leaps and bounds in your cars practice already in the last 5 seconds. What color socks is the person who writes this ethnographic study about basket weaving? Okay, well, number one, it's female for sure, right? With like just that like beautiful gray hair that's always just kind of blown back naturally. She's never worn makeup in her life and is just radiant. Um, and she's, slender and probably maybe I see her as tall. I don't know, I think. And she's just world traveled because she's gone to all these amazing countries and talked to people about their basket weaving. And she's probably wearing like, either if not rainbow patterned nylons, then some like happy face covered socks. And she for sure votes left. We think about it. That person that I've just described, you can see her, right? So now, if a passage asks you about what would this author think about the various artisanal breweries that crop up all across the GTA? What would she think? She'd love it, right? Not that mass produced manufactured Bud Light. It's all about the craftsmanship and the passion behind it. So we can answer questions. And I know I sound crazy. I'm well aware I sound crazy, but that's what Cars asks you to do. And that's what is frustrating because you're like, I don't know. Does she drink beer? I think she drinks white wine and tea for sure. But like, if she drank beer, it would be a craft beer. And that's the kind of synthesis that you're to do. And it's really stepping back. And I encourage students to sort of sit back and say, read the passage, not from here, not every single word, read it from up here. Who is the author? What are they trying to say? What message are they trying to send you? And if you just get that, you're good. And cars is important. It is important. A lot of schools, and we'll talk about this as we go through after we're done scoring, um, only look at cars. So Calgary only looks at cars. Ottawa doesn't take the MCAT, but will consider and focus on cars. McMaster, it's McMaster, right? I always get that one mixed up. It only uses the cars score. And schools are moving to a trend where the cars score is the most important. It's the worth the most in terms of your overall MCAT score because it's worth the full 25%. And it's, you know what? It's the best indicator of how well you're going to do on your board exams, like your actual to become a doctor exams. It's your CAR score when you're answering questions about basket weaving. It's not the hardcore MCAT biology passage about how the kidney works. That's not the best indicator. It's CARs. And so schools are kind of cluing in and focusing mostly on that. So so all of this synthesis distills down into a number. What's your score? And Chad, you can take it from here.
Certainly. And I can attest that cars is the most important just by nature of how you have to tackle this section compared to the others and ultimately what it is like to write a board exam and then thinking back to cars and thinking, yeah, maybe I'm better off because I feel like I know the content and it comes up. But in terms of the passages and what you're trying to gain from that and the hidden sort of agendas and the emotive and the hypotheses, it's all there. And ultimately, cars doesn't leave you. Maybe the topics leave you, the humanities, and you switch it for medical backgrounds. But how you would approach and tackle that section, it's prevalent throughout medicine and definitely right up until your exams. Now, ultimately, to get there, let's go back to some basics. When you look at the questions as individuals, individual questions, keep in mind that they're always going to be weighted equally from one another. Essentially meaning that if you do a section and you ultimately think you're getting a question wrong, or you do get a question wrong, those points aren't taken away from you. You can't go in the negative. You're there to gain. Any question that you answer is the potential for a point, and the hard questions versus the easiest, they're all worth the same. There's definitely no penalty to guessing. You have to guess something. When in doubt, do not leave an empty space. It is multiple choice, right? Try your best and you'll see our strategy on how we get down to the process of elimination. But ultimately, pick your best guess if you don't know the clear answer. The order of difficulty is randomized. It doesn't matter, chem section versus bio versus cars. You're not going to have an ascension of the easy to the hard, or as you get questions correct, they come harder and hit at you, faster in that regard in terms of difficulty. No, it's completely random. Some questions don't even count, guys. I remember writing the MCAT for both practice and for the real deal. And whenever I'd come across that passage that I just couldn't wrap my brain around, or even the specific question or two where the stems were just so confusing, I couldn't see how they related back to the passage or any foundational knowledge that I had going into the exam. In the back of my mind, I'm reminding myself that this might not even count. What that means is that on every MCAT exam, there's going to be a series of questions that are actually being employed for a trial. So on behalf of the AAMC, they need to test passages. They need to test questions to see ultimately, are they good MCAT passages and stems? If everyone's doing these trial questions and getting it wrong, so 0% get right, that's a big red flag as to, okay, we need to revise, we need to edit, or we need to scrap this question because obviously we're not getting, our objectives here. So for you, keep that in mind when you get to those hard or maybe even clear passages that have obvious errors. Missing data from a graph is not pretty typical for the MCAT, a bar that's just missing, or grammar that's very poor. Okay, the score is broken down in multiple ways. It's going to be raw, the number of questions you get right in a section, which will be converted to a section score. So 118 to 132 on all of the 4 sections we've already introduced you to. 118 being low, getting 0 to maybe 3 or 4 questions right. 132 being high, you're getting almost all questions right in that section. Those section scores are going to be compiled to a cumulative score, which again ranges 472 on the low, 528 if you're getting near all questions right across the board. These scores will be converted and will be displayed on your score report as a percentile, meaning how did you do compared to everyone else who wrote that particular exam model? And finally, confidence bands will also appear on that report. And I'll talk about those here in a second. So we think about where everyone can possibly score on the MCAT. The median that we see across the upper half of this slide with those little curves follow the stethoscope, midway 125. So if you're getting 50% roughly of all the questions right on a given section, a 125 would be where you would score. If you score 125s across the board, your cumulative score given on the latter half or the second half of this slide would be about a 500. All right. So you've written the MCAT, you've waited how many days? 30 to 35, takes about a month. Then you get that email that says your scores are available for viewing. You click the link from the email, you're brought to a login screen, and then you submit your password, and this is what you get, a prompt with the date for your score report. When you open it up, it more or less looks kind of like what we have on the slide. You'll see a breakdown from the test day by section, how you scored in that second column. Then you'll be given confidence bands. And the goal or the target of confidence bands are essentially a way to give the applicant, the test candidate, the ability to display how they would have performed on a variety of tests, not just the one they wrote on their exact day that they registered for, but maybe models A through D, even though you wrote test B. It shows that, oh, maybe I had a test that was very, very organic chemistry heavy, and organic's really not my thing, and I bombed all those questions. What if I wrote the test that my neighbor wrote that had very little organic chem? In that case, how would I perform in the bio section then? Maybe I would have done better. The confidence bands, similar to confidence intervals, are really supposed to sort of show and showcase the applicant's potential on a given section. So if I'm sitting on the admissions board and I see an MCAT score and I see a 126, but the confidence band ends up being 125 to 128, I may not sort of look at that applicant separate from the next candidate that I'm viewing. And then of course, you'll get your percentiles for that score too. What's a competitive score? Really, we're aiming for the 80th percentile, which means you want to have about a 127 in every section across the board and a cumulative score of 508. Balanced scores are always going to be preferred over lopsided scores, definitely. Now, the next series of slides really just take us through all the different sections and ultimately show you where most people score on their first and second attempts of doing this test. So for instance, chem and physics, most people are going to score between 124, 127. If you want to be in the 80th, you really need to get that 127 to 128 to be competitive. Next, cars, same is true, average 124, 125. Most schools have cutoffs of around 125, 126, but to be competitive, same is true. We want a 127 to a 128. Finally, the last two sections, they follow the very similar trends. We're aiming for 127, sometimes up to a 129, depending on the test model. That's our goal. Cumulatively, you put this all together, we want to aim for a sort of a 507 to 510 would be the typical peak range, keeping in mind that yes, you may not have a perfect balanced set of scores. You may have a 127, a 130, a 128. The idea is if cumulatively you meet the cutoffs and you're competitive, we'll take it. We just don't want to see a section that's very, very low. And of course, a section that takes you out of the running because you haven't met a cutoff. All right. Are some MCATs easier than other MCATs? Yes, they are. And that might be by nature of sort of how you studied and your approach to the MCAT, but also just luck of the passages that you've seen. With that said, within an MCAT, the easier questions, the easier passages, they don't have the same degree of freedom or forgiveness that say an MCAT that has harder passages and harder questions. And this all comes back to the process of equating, which is what the AAMC does to convert your raw scores into those scaled scores. So you have to keep that in mind. And it is an urban legend that the MCAT is a bell curve. It is definitely not a bell curve in the sense that your score ultimately does not depend on your neighbor or the people that are writing across the country that same exam. It's solely based on your independent test effort and the score that you achieve, not comparison to a mean of those that are writing a similar model test.
All
Perfect.
right, so let's talk about the role in admission. So we're just going to be talking about the English language Canadian medical schools. So there's one in every province, not the territories. And we'll talk about how they look at just your MCAT score. Okay, again, our Getting into Medical School seminar, which will be coming, dates TBD. We will talk about all the other things that they look for. But in the typical way of viewing the MCAT, and different schools have slightly different combinations of these. But in Canada, the most common is a cutoff where you just simply cannot apply if you don't have over, in general, a 124 in each section. Okay, then you can apply, but they don't look at it. And then there's also direct criteria where the MCAT score acts as a multiplier, usually with your GPA, your interview score, so on and so forth. The University of Ottawa kind of gives this formula of how they calculate what your ranking is. They expose that again. Getting into Medical School seminar, we'll talk more about each individual school. As a flag, sometimes it is just like everything else looks great on your application, but man, did you just squeak in with the MCAT with the minimum scores? It can act as a flag as well, and a tiebreaker, right? If you have the exact same ranking as another student, but your MCAT and particularly your CAR score was through the roof, yeah, the admissions board will go, yeah, they get it. So here's the use of the MCAT scores. So again, most schools across Canada have a minimum required for consideration and the direct criteria where it just multiplies into your overall score. Notice that Ottawa, Northern Ontario do not require an MCAT at all. Ottawa's slowly waking up to the fact that it's a pretty easy way to distinguish between the various student qualities. But most of them have that minimum and the direct criteria. And keep in mind, right, your medical school application in our Getting into Medical School seminar, we'll talk about everything except the MCAT stuff. We'll talk about your GPA. We'll talk about extracurriculars. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do you ask for letters of reference? It is certainly not just about your MCAT, but in general, we sort of suggest that you dedicate one full summer, like 3 months you can work, but one summer of dedicated MCAT study to get that out of the way, and then work the rest of your 4 years of undergrad is spent on the remaining stuff. So what makes the MCAT hard? Well, I mean, the science isn't difficult. It's just usually first year kind of level. It's just there's so much of it, right? You got to memorize all the amino acids and memorize a bunch of formula, and then also be able to understand the different theories of, I don't know, whatever they do in psych, and all the parts of the brain. And there's just so much of it, but it's not, the MCAT doesn't expect you to have, you know, grad school level knowledge about the countercurrent exchanger in the kidney or some crazy synthesis reaction in OChem. They just expect the breadth of your first year typical science student all in one test. And the math isn't hard. You don't have a calculator. So you can't do calculus, you can't do logarithms and those kinds of things, but you don't have a calculator, and that makes it stressful for making dumb mistakes. But Chancey, what did you find, I guess, is the hardest part of the MCAT?
Oh gosh, I don't think I can pick one thing. I think overall it's just, and it's brought up on these slides and in more words than needed perhaps, but it's a taxing exam. Like from the point you decide you want to take this and you're doing the administrative pieces, you're putting forth your study plan, you're committing to a study plan, you do dozens and dozens of practice, you put in so much time, like you approach it kind of like a full-time job, or for some of us that work, a part-time job that takes a lot of commitment. I think the hardest aspects, oh my gosh, I would probably say, I'd say the mental exhaustion. It's just the fact that you're learning and developing a foundation in so many different disciplines to ultimately, utilize and employ on the exam. It's so tough. The fact that you don't have a calculator, that's totally okay. If you can learn how to multiply and divide your exponents, you'll be fine. The math is pretty straightforward after that. On this slide, what jumps out at me, I'd say MCAT speak. Honestly, the biggest hurdle for me, I think, was understanding sort of the tricks that you can be led down when reading a passage or reading a stem. The example I often use is a stem that says, which of the following answers is least likely to be incorrect? It's so wordy, least likely to be incorrect. Okay, so I want the right answer. I can't tell you how many times I've been anxious and rushed through a stem and didn't fully sort of appreciate what it was asking me. And that's just the way the MCAT likes to write their stems. Other aspects here, I mean, yeah, being counterintuitive at time constraints, yeah, you're against the clock. One thing to keep in mind is you'll come across these very hard passages and questions, and you'll think, is this a trick question? Like, are they trying to get me here? Because this doesn't seem like the right answer. There really is no trick question on the MCAT, just tricky questions on the MCAT. Aids provided. So depending on the facility in which you write, you'll notice that not only do you have your 1994 Windows desktop computer with super loud keyboard and mouse, but you also have a variety of scrap paper to your side. Some people end up writing with small little whiteboards and have a magic erase marker, but you'll have something to write on, something to write with. You also have the option of utilizing noise canceling, sometimes over the ear headphones. More often than not, facilities are adjusting to the orange foam earplugs that you can bring just to tune out your surroundings. But keep in mind, again, no calculators, no timers on the desk, no watches allowed. It's just the time counting down in each individual section on the screen. What if you have a bad day? So you've written the MCAT, and like we mentioned, Tora and I earlier, no one feels great by the end of writing this exam. And then you have that great survey, but just before that, you're asked, okay, now that it's all said and done, you've put forth your 7.5 hours. Would you like us to score this exam? Or would you want us to avoid this attempt and not score it, not count it towards your 7 tests in a lifetime? That's more words than not. You have to approach this very critically because, again, because everyone feels so poorly after writing the MCAT, you have to think, maybe I didn't do as bad as I thought I did. I'm just mentally exhausted. And if anything, having this exam scored, you have the benefit of option one, getting the section scores that you need to achieve your goal of applying to your programs. Option B, maybe it doesn't go so well, but you've got active real-time feedback as to where you can improve over time. Now, after you've written the MCAT, and we've had a few questions in the actual chat about this, is how do schools approach multiple MCAT scores, right? I went in and I had 3 sets of scores by the time I was doing the application cycle. And depending on if you're West Coast, East Coast, different schools have really 2 main ways of approaching MCAT scores. One, they'll take your highest, meaning if you wrote the test 7 times and your 4th attempt had the highest score set, that is what they're going to look like. That's going to be the score that you share with the school as part of your application. Some of the other institutions will look at your most recent, meaning that if you've written the thing 6 or 7 times, it doesn't matter that your 4th was the highest score set. They're going to look at the last attempt, the 6th or 7th exam, and view it that way.
Okay, so we have let you guys know that the exam's hard. Yes, and there's a lot to do. So how do you get ready? Number one, okay, you can do it. You can do it. It does not take some superhuman to do well on the MCAT. It just takes someone who has their own discipline, or more importantly, has discipline implemented to their lives so that you can do it. So if you're now, there are no prerequisites for the MCAT. Okay. It's just that in preparation for the MCAT, a lot of students are already in the medical ish vein and are taking physiology kind of stuff. You do not have to. You can be an engineer, you can be a music student. But in in terms of the MCAT, if you're thinking, okay, especially in the second year, you're going to choose your classes. Well, physiology is a big one. Organic chemistry is a big one, and a little bit of physics, a little bit of psych, a little bit of soc. All of those will help you and build towards your good MCAT score. Biochem, again, I've sort of said that biochem is generally surprisingly overweighted on the exam. So a first year biochem, like not if whatever, the first version of biochem that you have in your home institution. But when should you write the MCAT? Well, in the end, we recommend the summer of your second year. So summer of your second year, say you're in second year right now, that means summer 2021, you're writing the MCAT. Because if you are a traditional science student, then you have just finished all the courses that are going to lead you into the knowledge you need for the MCAT, right? And if you're a first year student, you haven't maybe got your organic chemistry or your biochem or your physiology under your belt, depending on your institution. And so you may not have all the knowledge to walk into the MCAT, but that's our job too, right? Our job is to teach you that material. So that's where we come in. Now, the summer of your second year also is strategic because it gives you a chance to maybe need to write it again in your third year. Obviously, a one and done is best, but if you need to wait and write it again for the summer of your third year, first of all, Prep 101 lets you retake our course as many times as you want. So there's no, worry about having to go through the cost of doing a course again. That's all contained. But you can also take the summer after your third year, and then that's your application year. If you're in fourth year right now, and you're looking to take the MCAT this summer, it just means that you will have to take a year off before your entry into medical school, because it takes basically a full calendar year to be admitted into medical school. So the writings of the MCAT, these are the 2021 dates in Canada, and you see the bulk of them in August. That is when most students choose to write. We have courses starting as early as February 15th, in like 3 weeks from now. And so you can take those April dates and get it out of the way, or the May dates and get it out of the way, depending on what your lifestyle is right now. Okay, but really the most of the courses are going to start in May, June-ish. May 15th, May 22nd, sorry, we start, and we go through for 10 weeks. And so then when you finish the course, you've got a couple of weeks to write those exams. The most coveted exam dates are the August 21st, 13th, 14th, 21st, because it gives you a couple of weeks of downtime, of practice time, of stepping away from the learning the material in class and solidifying the material on your own. Okay. Now you can register because of COVID. Hate that phrase, but because of COVID, the AAMC is moving to a like February 15th. The dates open for the April, May, and June test dates. And then they have another rolling admission, just because if COVID changes, and testing centers has to shut down or something like that, then they want to be able to be flexible. Normally, like the second Tuesday in February, you can register for all the dates, not this year. So as far as I can tell, they haven't released when the next round of exam dates will be available, but that's all done by the AAMC. And so the question becomes, should you take a course like Prep 101's? Chancey, you didn't the first time. You wrote without taking one. How did that
No,
feel?
you know what, folks, not well. Again, underestimating and definitely not prepping for it. I wish I would have taken a course. And I want to talk about, why you should take a course and maybe why you wouldn't take a course. But first, we want to give you all a second to do an evaluation of the seminar so far. We just want to give you maybe 2 or 3 minutes. We're going to have the link posted to you in the group. And we really value the feedback to these seminars. We change them up sort of from month to month based on the feedback we get from our participants. So you could just take 2 or 3 minutes. We'll give you the space. You won't miss anything to fill out these evals. And then Tor and I will jump back into this slide and wrap up our presentation. The link should be posted now to the general chat forum. Okay, thank you everyone for filling out those evals. Again, we appreciate the feedback. So should you take a prep course? Um, let's base it on sort of 3 things to be broad. One, self-discipline. If you've got the discipline to stick to a study plan, to allot the appropriate interval of time, so not a weekend, but instead weekends, months studying and prepping and practicing for the MCAT, and you can stick to that schedule, yeah, maybe you don't need a prep course. When you're doing your practice exams, if you're scoring in the 75th percentile consistently on a variety of exam difficulties, that's great too. Maybe you don't need the prep course. And then finally, on those exams, how are your section scores? If you think you're coming out and you're fairly balanced, you don't have a clear weakness in, say, I don't know, randomly, let's just say cars. I'm not sure it's unheard of. But if it's cars or bio that are bringing you down, we got to change this question around, right? We have to think, oh, you know what? Maybe you do need a prep course. So if you go it alone, I have a few sort of words of wisdom. One, you need to approach it like it's a full-time job. I don't necessarily mean that you need to put in 12-hour days because we all have different lives. Some of us work, some of us are in school, others have the time off, and that's great. Regardless of your situation, the time you're investing into studying, you need to take it seriously. You need to be focused. You need to practice deliberately, okay? As you start your study plan, you're going to identify your weaknesses. Go back, don't ignore them, okay? Don't shortchange cars. That's probably the best advice I could give to you from my own experiences. It's not just if you can read, you can perform. It is so much more than that, folks. You need to appreciate it and give it its attention that it deserves. Do full-length MCATs and do them under real testing conditions. Do the test in the morning. Get up at 8 a.m. and write the test at 8:30 a.m. if that's what your date's going to be like on a Saturday. Write every Saturday for the 3 or 4 weeks before your actual exam. Buy MCAT study guides. Buy as many as you want so that you have the practice to actually perform and practice the materials. You can get some from the AAMC, and you can also join a variety of these pre-med online forums that talk about general tips and tricks. Why take a prep course? So all the reasons I should have done it. One, I needed the structure, and I needed people that knew what they were talking about and knew what they were doing. I needed instructors that knew the material, knew how to teach it, knew how to give me real-time feedback as to how I could better my proficiencies amongst the 4 sections. I needed the forum to focus and to be motivated, around it, with the people around me that, we're all ultimately, trying to achieve a common goal, getting the scores that we want to get past the MCAT, move on to all the other aspects of medical application that we really were looking forward to. You get the feedback. You should be getting real-time help, as I said, by expert instructors that, again, have been doing this for some period of time. And think of it as teamwork, right? It's not like, university where you're attending a class because you really just want to get that credit and you're out, or maybe you decide not to go to classes. That instructor is there for you just as much as you want them to be there. I mean, they want to see you succeed. Tor and I want you to do well. We are rooting for you all the way. We'll give as much as you're willing to receive and get you through this aspect of your application. So, summary, it keeps you on track. The number one cause of poor MCAT scores is not sticking to your plan, not putting forth the practice, the foundational study time, and ultimately not getting feedback to improve on those weaknesses.
And I might point out, Chancey, that now Prep 101 offers a super comprehensive study plan that's tailored to your which course you're taking, like which date span you're taking this course in, because we do have 7 offerings of that can fit basically any lifestyle and any time zone in the world. And we give you a study plan that's like, this is what you study this day. This is how to get back on track if you get off that study plan, but it's personalized to your test date and to your course dates. It's amazing. Like it's amazing. It's really intimidating when you first look at it, but then once you get going, it's like we've cognitively offloaded so much of that stuff where you have to plan your study schedule out. It's like, here, take it. Here it is. Just follow the instructions. It's really easy.
We need to go back to like 20, or not even 20, 2007, 2008 me, and tell me all this stuff again.
All right. So what should you be looking for in a prep class? So look for top quality instructors like us and Mike behind the scenes. Yeah, that's us.
Howdy.
So yeah, but I'll explain why we end up being the ones that you guys want to learn from. Comprehensive study materials. So we use exam crackers because they're the best. They're fantastic. And we also use Altius. So we partner with these companies to provide enough materials for you, and we provide them all for you. And a course that's designed that works for you. So our course is designed to really just produce higher scores. Really, that's what you're in it for. You're not in it for learning something cool. You're not doing this out of interest. I hope you're interested in it, or else you maybe should consider a different profession if you're not interested in the basics of how the body works. But you were getting you higher scores. That's my job. That's my only job, is to get you a higher score. And I teach. I'm a prof as well, and I teach at University of Alberta, and you know we need a curve. We need a distribution. We need Fs. Not in this course. I love this course because I'm cheering every single one of you on. I don't have to fail anybody. I always joke that usually my Fs are they volunteer as tributes because they don't show up to exams and blah, blah, blah. Right. So those are easy. But we have this just really comprehensive approach. So we focus on practice, on guided practice. Okay. We teach you how to solve this test, not just the material. The material is the easy part. How to solve this test. What are the typical ways and mistakes students make on the MCAT? And by overestimating, underestimating question stems, those kinds of things will train you on how to solve and crack this test. The MCAT, it follows a formula. It's a very formulaic exam. There's very little difference between the strategies that they expect from you. And we'll teach you those. So you can kind of like hack the exam in a way. You'll get to a point where you're like, oh, I see that. I just keep getting the same question over and over again. Just the context has changed. Exactly. I mean, in cars, there's like 6 different question types. That's it. There's just contextually slightly different. So we focus the most on cars, definitely the most classroom time of any course on cars because you're going to need it. But we spend the most classroom time, period. And unlimited free repeat policy, as I said, no questions asked. Everyone always expects their strings. There aren't. We're seeing a lot more that students after their first year of university are registering for the course, taking the course, not really planning on writing the MCAT in the summer of first year, and then just repeating, coming back for second year. It kind of ends up getting a double whammy, because if you do it after your first year or second, then you see the material that most students will eventually see, especially if you're a science student. I'll already teach you about enzyme kinetics or about heart physiology. And it's like there's no stakes because you're just learning it kind of for fun that year. But then you go into your undergrad and you've got a foundation of knowledge that you can get a higher GPA. And let's face it, your GPA is the most important number when it comes to applying for medicine. And then you just repeat, just keep coming back. Happy to have you. And we have that personalized study plan that I mentioned. And this is what I love. I mean, it's so great for my lifestyle too, is the flexible schedule. So there's two options. And when you go to the Prep 101 slash MCAT, there's quite an array of courses. Just pay attention to whether you want to be in class. So look at which market you're in. We do offer in most of the major cities across the country. Classroom options. That could change out of our control of whether we're allowed to gather in larger groups. But the plan is, God, I want to see your faces, is to get us in the class. And hopefully, depending on where you are and depending on the COVID situation, we'll be in class for courses. And we do weekdays, okay? Weekdays, mornings, 9:30 to 1:30 in Central Time Zone, but those time zones can differ. We have 9:30 to 1:30, Mountain Time Zone, and then 7:30 to there's an option. There's a range. We have a lot of classes, a lot. Okay. You will find one that suits your schedule. You will find one that suits your work schedule, your life schedule, whatever. Okay. But normally there's this morning 4 hours and then there's an evening 4 hours. But here's the thing. We repeat. So if you attend Bio 1, which is, oh God, Chancey, what's Bio 1? Metabolism and macromolecules, enzyme stuff. That's Bio 1, right?
Yeah,
And
I
you
think you're
attend
right.
that. Yeah. Okay. So you attend that Monday morning. And so you say that come to that Monday morning. We do the whole dog and pony show again Monday night. You can attend both if you want. You can attend one or the other depending on your life schedule, or you can wait and just do it on the weekends. The weekends are all online. So if you're not in a major market, if you're sitting in Sri Lanka right now tonight, hello, whatever that is, or if you're from rural Saskatchewan and you've got a decent enough internet connection that you can do it on the weekends, that's online. Okay. And so online, you know what? I have to admit, I'm sorry if any of my students are here right now. The Prep 101 delivery of online content is way better in quality to the undergraduate delivery of content. We're just better at it. It's live, it's engaging. You have polls, you have questions, someone's answering the questions behind the scenes. So, we have a subject specialist that's answering your questions while I'm talking. And so you get this real feedback. It's been, I actually very pleasantly surprised, and better than my undergrad classes. Sorry. And we also then we have the online flex option that's more dedicated to online learning. I know you're sick of it. Oh God, I want to be in the classroom, but we might not have the option, but we do offer the best product that we can. And it's a good one. I'm not going to lie. All of our instructors, so whether it's Mike behind the scenes tonight, Chancey, or me, we were all hired at auditions. So we had to actually walk into, and yeah, Chancey always say it's like this American Idol, right?
It's like American Idol. Pick your
Yeah.
song, you walk in the room, and your audience are the students that are either taking the course, have taken the course in the past, or have friends and family that are going to take your course. So they're picking you. They're picking who they want to learn from. And as an instructor, Tor and I talked about this before, it's pretty nerve-wracking. Like, we're glad we're not going through this again now, because you are tough. You, the students, can be tough, and it's good because obviously
every single
something's working.
student, yeah, a single student in the audience feels like Simon Cowell. Like,
Yeah.
just like, you guys pick the instructors that you want. And this has happened. I was in the room. So we were auditioning physics instructors in Edmonton, and couldn't just eat all of them. Like, one of them had 2 PhDs, like, so qualified, but just wasn't that good at teaching. And regardless of the qualifications, you have to be good at teaching. And we went through, I think, 14 applicants, and no one was really inspiring. And so we said, you know what? We're not going to hire any of them. Luke, who still teaches for us, he was in London, England at the time. And we're like, you know what? No, we're committed to high quality instruction. We're going to fly Luke in from London, and he's going to come to Edmonton. Fabulous place to spend 2 weeks, and teach for 2 weeks and do all the physics, because he's the best. And we couldn't find anyone better, and so we didn't bother. So, like, it's definitely an intense process of how we pick our instructors. I got through early. So they can't get rid of me.
Same.
Yeah, so
Lifeless.
we're good. You're stuck with us. But the course is a lot of money. I cannot deny it's 1,200, it's 2,500 bucks, but I know that's a lot of money. Okay, especially because a lot of your jobs have been curtailed, at least temporarily. It includes a lot of materials. If you're going alone and you don't want to take a prep course, you're probably still going to run about a $1,500 bill just to get the proper AAMC materials, which I strongly suggest because you're getting it straight from the horse's mouth. The AAMC writes the MCAT, and they've provided old MCATs for you to purchase. And then you need full length exams so you can practice your full test day on the interface that you use. So that's Altius. You're going to need study guides. So all of that we roll in. That's all part of our tuition. You do not need to spend another penny on your MCAT pursuits after you enroll in our course. So stay tuned because we are going to go through some of the free, I'm giving them for free. I'm just going to give all of our tactics for free, but these are the contacts for you, mcat.prep101.com. Probably already been there, but pay attention there. So I'm going to just kind of give you the synopsis, the Wikipedia entry for what our course is about. Okay. And we talk about what we call executing tactics and avoiding the traps. So if you're going to go it alone, still get these slides, go through this and focus on these 7 strategies. Okay. We spend a lot of time. What I think about these is like, we're honing tools. You don't have pretty much any of these tools yet. And we're going to shape those tools and put them in your toolbox. And you're going to use them and you'll learn how to use them for any individual passage. But you need to be able to have very mature, very proficient in pausing, in analyzing, in mapping, in paraphrasing, in all these techniques that really make the MCAT a very doable exam. So number 1, we encourage you to pause. And this is going to sound crazy because we've talked about how it's timing is an issue and you're going to run out of time and it's hard because it's exhausting and the time it takes is so intense. And we're going to tell you to stop. But here's the thing. If you do 10 passages in a row, are you going to stay focused for that whole 95 minutes? Oh my God, if you can. Wow. For me, I'm like squirrel.
Yeah,
Right?
you're not doing it. You're
Yeah,
not.
no, like
You're not.
amazing. So you're going to crack. Might as well take your breaks instead of having. What if you're like you're just done and this is their faces in front of the screen and you're reading a passage and you're like, I've been sitting and staring at this passage for 3 minutes and I have no idea what I've read. It's because you didn't take your break. Your break, I always feel like, is like an etch-a-sketch. It's like I spend 9 minutes doing my passage and taking all my notes and putting it in my brain, stuffing it there. And then when I'm done that passage, I compartmentalize. And I take my brain and I shake it and it resets and I start new. And I take this breath and I have a tendency to kind of like, okay, next. And that allows me to not get interrupted by the accrued exhaustion. Okay, so like I know it's silly. You take a 3-second break and then you tackle the passage as a unit. You scan the passage. Again, my visual is silly here, but I have this visual of like you glance at the passage and go, okay, it's about the kidney. I open my file drawer. I open the file and I'm like, what do I know about the kidney? Okay, I got this. And then you start tackling the passage and you read and map the passage. Mapping is a skill. The way I think about mapping is like, you write an essay in high school and your teacher is always, and no one ever does, you say, write an outline. What do you want to say? What's your point for each paragraph? Not the details, not like what date was this battle fought in Waterloo or whatever. Just what's your point for each paragraph, for each section of your essay? And that's what you want to recreate. You read this passage and you go, what was the author's outline? What did they want to say with paragraph 1? What was their point? What was their point in paragraph 2? What was their point in paragraph 3? And what that does is it creates a mental map of what's the flow of the passage. It gets you to the main idea. What's this passage about? So you finish reading a passage and you stop again and you say, what did I just read? What was the point? And hopefully that answer is not blank. Hopefully the answer you fill out with like, right, okay, this was about all the different basket weaving techniques and how varied they are. And yet the structures end up being so similar in the end. And it's sort of this convergent evolution of basket weaving. That's what it was about. Okay. Then you go to the questions, and only then do you go to the questions. You
I feel like
paraphrase
you've
the
had a passage or two in basket weaving in the past, Laura. I feel like maybe one or two.
I've had passages about, holy cow, I've had passages about everything. Some I actually learned things from that I've actually employed in my real life, like how to sand a table, how to sand, like sanding down woodwork. I learned that from a Cars passage. So Cars has some uses. So then you read a question and you read it, and then you try and paraphrase it into one or to about 3 words, and then you read it again before looking at the answers. And then the answers, you start to look at what we call distractors. There's a formula to the MCAT. Okay, there are common ways that make an answer wrong in the MCAT. If it has the flavor of seeming too extreme, probably wrong. Okay, and then you eliminate. As Chancey was saying, is one of the biggest tasks of a doctor is saying what's not causing the symptoms. What can I rule out? And then whatever's left standing is your most likely outcome. So that's kind of a wrap for tonight. Okay. The slides, once you download them and get them off Facebook, or email mcat@prep101.com for these slides, we can send them out. Then you'll have this at your disposal. Okay. And it's always available on Facebook. I know not everyone has Facebook profiles anymore. And we can get the information to you. So stay tuned for our Getting into Medical School seminar. The registration for Prep 101's MCAT course is live. You can go ahead and register early. Our first course starts February 15th. Our probably biggest course, most popular course, starts in after May long weekend. So the 3rd week in May. And so hopefully we'll see you guys in person. And if not, I'll at least feel you through the screen of my camera. So take care. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday. And we'll see you at the Getting into Medical School seminar.
Hope to see you there, everyone. Just remember, this is the start of a long journey. Whatever motivation you've obtained and utilized to get to this point, use it as the spark to continue through what can be a very daunting process. Ultimately, if this is what you want to do, you're going to do it. We're all going to have different journeys and you will get there. And if we can help, that's what we're here for. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.